Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook. On this week's show, we'll take a closer look at an emergency meeting that was recently held by Richmond Municipal Council. And we'll take a look at how the decisions coming out of that meeting could have an impact on the level of transparency between Council and Richmond County residents. I'll also speak to Richmond Warden Amanda Mombourquette about the difficulty Council is having in crafting a vaccination policy for municipal employees. Still with COVID-19, I'll also interview Michael Hatt. He's the owner and operator of the medicine shop on Reeves Street in Port Hawkesbury, and Hatt and his colleagues recently reached a major milestone in terms of Nova Scotia's COVID-19 vaccination strategy. In a few moments' time, I'll take you to Auld's Cove. That's where several people gathered on Saturday morning and hit the road to take part in a major anti-vaccine mandate protest that took place in Halifax over the weekend. But we begin with a listing of how things have changed here in Nova Scotia as a result of the first week of the first of 3 month-long phases that are designed to loosen up and eventually eliminate COVID-19 gathering rules and restrictions in the province. It's going to happen in 3 phases, so let's break down what you can expect for each of those phases and what's happening already as we head into the first week of Phase 1 here in Nova Scotia. Events will be taking place again, gathering limits will increase, and all border restrictions for domestic travelers will be lifted. Gathering limits will be decreased again for Phase 2, and in Phase 3 there will be no more gathering limits or physical distance requirements. As Phase 1 gets underway, the informal gathering limit indoors and outdoors will be 25 people from the same household or close social group. We can also tell you that physical distance and proof of full vaccination are not required, and masks are not required except in indoor public places. The formal gathering limit for gatherings and events hosted by a recognized business or organization will be 50% of capacity. That applies to indoors and outdoors. And if you're wondering what kind of events fall under this 50% capacity rule, well, here they are. Festivals, special events, social gatherings, regular faith services, including wedding ceremonies, funeral ceremonies, and associated visitation, receptions, meetings, training, and spectators at sports events, performances, and movie theaters. Yes, that's right, the sports and arts and culture segment is having its restrictions loosened up again, so events can happen under these areas as well. Taking a look at the retail sector, retail businesses and malls can operate at the maximum capacity possible with physical distance and masks. Personal services like hair salons can resume offering services that require removing masks. They can already operate at the maximum capacity possible with physical distance. Food establishments and liquor licensed establishments can operate at 75% capacity. They must have physical distance between tables, and there's a limit of 25 people per table. They must stop dine-in service by midnight and close by 1 a.m., but takeout, drive-through, and delivery can operate later than this. Performers can follow the limits for arts and culture participants that we just spoke to you about earlier on in the program. In terms of fitness, recreation, and leisure businesses and organizations can operate at 75% capacity. These limits apply to fitness facilities like gyms, yoga studios, pools, and arenas, to recreation and leisure activities like dance and music lessons, indoor play places, arcades, shooting ranges, dog training, and to museums and libraries. Personal training is allowed with as much physical distance as possible. Day camps and before and after school programs can operate with groups of up to 30 campers, staff, and volunteers. Speaking of schools, enhanced public measures such as classroom cohorts and not allowing non-essential visitors are going to remain in effect at all schools in Nova Scotia. We can also tell you that singing and use of wind instruments can resume. Schools will follow the community guidelines on sports, arts, and culture, but spectators will only be permitted after school hours. In terms of long-term care, residents can have any 2 visitors at a time. They no longer need to be the same 2 visitors. Visitors must still wear masks and be fully vaccinated except for end-of-life visits. Even if they are fully vaccinated, residents can only leave the facility for medical appointments or for a drive in a facility or visitor's vehicle with no stops and no contact with other people outside the facility, Only residents who are eligible and have had a booster dose can access service providers for recreational activities and personal services like hairstyling, and facilities may continue to have residents in consistent groups for dining and activities. Now, still on the COVID-19 front, as we were heading into our final production phase for this week's edition of Telile 24/7, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Federal Emergencies Act, giving the federal government wider powers to be able to deal with a 16-day protest and blockade that's been taking place in Ottawa, along with similar protests that have been happening in different parts of central and western Canada. These have sparked some copycat protests that have been taking place in smaller parts of the country, including right here in the Maritimes. Earlier on, we mentioned that there was a protest in Halifax over the weekend. There was also one in Fredericton. And the protest in Halifax did have a small but vocal contingent from the Strait area that gathered in Auld's Cove on Saturday morning. Let's take you to the parking lot of the Irving Big Stop right now and see how things unfolded as the sun rose this past Saturday. In comparison with other gatherings of truck drivers and others who are opposed to vaccine mandates, it's been relatively quiet on this sunny Saturday morning at the Irving Big Stop in Auld's Cove. Only a handful of vehicles are taking part in the convoy. The message is clear for all of them. They don't want vaccine mandates to proceed, and they're going all the way along the eastern shore to Halifax to make their point.
Our route's going to take us all the way, we're going to go down to Guysborough, to Goldboro, and all the way down the eastern shore on the old number 7. We're going to go through, Sheet Harbour, then eventually Ship Harbour, Musquodoboit Harbour, and right up through Cole Harbour. A lot of harbours there. We're going to go up through Cole Harbour, going past Micmac Mall, and then we're going to take the Victoria Road exit all the way around the Bedford Highway into the heart of Halifax.
This is Ryan McKenna. He hails from Musquodoboit Harbour, and he's the local organizer for the Auld's Cove wing of this particular protest. And he feels that going along rural routes on the eastern shore will make more of an impact and attract more people to join the convoy than sticking to the main highways.
Right, well, we felt that the Eastern Shore tends to get forgotten in a lot of events around the province, and that, we felt that they're just as deserving as unity in this province and recognition as any other population centre. Not to mention the fact that the old number 7, although it is a rougher road in the province, it is a truck route. It's going past all the fish plants and all the wharves and everything all the way down the Eastern Shore. There's a fair amount of trucks going through there, so we felt that it was good to represent that area and to acknowledge that area and to give them a chance to jump into the convoy and to come to Halifax and have their voices heard.
Now, you may have heard the word unity in that last answer from Ryan McKenna. He made his comments as the Ottawa Freedom Convoy protests entered their third week, and after a difficult week here in Nova Scotia in terms of COVID-19 and protests against vaccine mandates. Breton-Canso Member of Parliament Mike Kellaway was one of 5 Nova Scotia MPs from 2 different parties whose constituency offices received packages containing disturbing imagery and chemical irritants. In addition, Nova Scotia has experienced 65 deaths to COVID-19 since the start of 2022, including a record monthly high of 35 in January, culminating in Friday's report of Nova Scotia's first child death due to COVID-19. However, as he continues to wrap up the fine details with the 12 other drivers joining him on this leg of the Nova Scotians for Freedom protest, Ryan McKenna insists that he isn't looking to divide Nova Scotians, but rather to bring them together in a more positive spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very optimistic. We're feeling very positive. We do feel like there is a shift happening in Canada right now towards an acknowledgement of freedom, but also an acknowledgement that there's been a lot of misleading over the past 2 years. There's been a lot of good intentions as well, but we do have to acknowledge a lot of, both successes and failures in the handling of the pandemic. We see the country coming together, right? And we wanted Nova Scotia very much to be a part of that unity. That is why the purpose of today is to unify the province, heal some rifts and divisions, get people to look at one another as, what we are, which is, we're true blue Nova Scotians. We all inhabit this province. We all, deal with the same struggles. We should be coming together and we should be looking to our elected leaders for answers and accountability from what's going on. So the number one thing for today is unity, positivity, love for one another, for all of us, regardless of your beliefs or regardless of your feelings on the pandemic or any political situation. We want everyone to get back together, start to reunify, and start to end the pain that a lot of people have been experiencing throughout the pandemic. We think it's time.
Among the small crowd that gathers here in Auld's Cove just prior to this protest's departure at 7:30 on Saturday morning, it's clear that some feel they have been impacted by vaccine mandates, not just federally, but here in Nova Scotia. However, it's also becoming clear that there aren't going to be many, if any, participants from urban Cape Breton. And as for the big rigs gathered in Auld's Cove at the Irving Big Stop on this Saturday morning, they're just doing their job and carrying out their business, and they're not participating in this particular protest. As the departure time draws near, protest organizers admit that their expectations may have been too high for an Auld's Cove gathering that came together literally within the last 36 hours of the week.
Throughout the country, the events have traditionally been happening on Saturday, the freedom events, so we sort of wanted to work our way into that schedule, and we knew that we were on a short time frame. So we planned 3 routes, one from here, one from Yarmouth, and one from Kingston, all going into the heart of Halifax to culminate in a rally. We wanted to organize Cape Breton, but the logistics of it were that anyone coming from, let's say, Sydney or the northern tip would have had to leave yesterday. So what we did is, and we didn't have organizers on the ground there, and unfortunately there simply wasn't time to get that together in addition to the logistic efforts of the rest of the province. We didn't want to make Cape Breton feel left out, however, we certainly wanted to encourage them to come down and to join us. So we put a suggested route down and a suggestion that any vehicles wanting to join from Cape Breton leave yesterday to be here at the rally point for this morning for our 7:30 departure. It's a little bit smaller here because A, it's an early morning start, and second, people did have to come from a fair distance to meet here. The conservative estimate that we got around Thursday for Kingston's convoy is about 400 vehicles, and we're certainly expecting that to grow. We're also expecting this convoy, which as you can see is starting to form up, to grow as we carry on down the eastern shore, especially when we start to hit places like Porter's Lake and areas like that, but we certainly expect to build the convoy as we go along, and we'll try to get it in a nice tight formation coming into Halifax so people can see our enthusiasm and our spirit the way it's meant to be. Great community enthusiasm for the most part. Of course, there's some people who don't agree with what we're doing. We understand that. We respect those opinions. We think that they have the right to express those opinions just like we have the right to express ours, and we would never try to silence anyone for that. We love all of our fellow Canadians and all of our fellow Nova Scotians, and all we want is for people to come together and start looking to the responsible parties. If we're going to be addressing these issues, we got to stop blaming our neighbors and our friends and our family and start looking at the responsible parties to do what they're paid to do, which is create solutions that allow us to carry on with our lives.
Finally, the 13 vehicles participating in the straight area wing of the Nova Scotians for Freedom protest left the Irving Big Stop parking lot in Auld's Cove, making a pass up and down the Canso Causeway before heading through northeastern Antigonish County en route to Guysborough and Halifax counties. Later that afternoon, the protesters joined an estimated 300 people from across the province. And as he prepared to enter his own vehicle in the Auld's Cove Irving Big Stop parking lot, Ryan McKenna insisted that despite the low turnout on this Saturday morning in Auld's Cove, he expects to see more protests of this nature around Nova Scotia, and particularly in Cape Breton and northeastern Nova Scotia.
Oh, absolutely, yes. So Nova Scotians for Freedom is the group putting on the event, and we are looking to the long haul. So even if the passports and mandates get dropped, we certainly don't expect that that's the end of the fight, and we are certainly feeling that we are winning that fight in public opinion and just with the pressure of these rallies and with people coming together, as I've said. But at the same time, just because those things get dropped does not mean that we don't need to set a precedent for the future to ensure that we have real, honest dialogue before imposing anything like this again, because we really need to hash out the lessons that we've learned here. And we really need to take people to task for their decisions and for them to justify those decisions to the people that it's affected.
And as this handful of vehicles prepares to leave Auld's Cove and head along Nova Scotia's eastern shore to meet up with their fellow protesters in Halifax on Saturday afternoon, one thing is clear: they're ready to take their message to whoever is able to hear it and do something about it, and they're hoping to see more protests of this type around Cape Breton and northeastern Nova Scotia, as well as different parts of the province, even as restrictions begin to lift on this third week of February. In Auld's Cove for Telile 24/7, I'm Adam Cook. And before we go any further, a special thank you to my assistant cameraman in Auld's Cove on Saturday morning, Patrick Lamey, for helping me to film the opening and closing of the piece you just saw. Still with COVID-19, it's difficult for municipalities to craft a vaccination policy for their employees that not only meets the requirements of public health, but also meets legal requirements that respect the rights and choices that individual people make in terms of vaccination. So we thought we'd ask Amanda Mombourquette, the Warden of Richmond County, to explain how difficult that process has been for Council and where it stands right now. Take a look. What can you tell us about where those discussions are and when we might see that coming together?
Yeah, so that vaccination policy was right at the top of our last bylaw and policy committee meeting, because it had already gone to council. And where we landed on that was that we just wanted to get some legal advice to make sure that what we had written in policy isn't sort of contravening some sort of workplace standard that maybe we were not aware of, because we're not, our expertise is not in that kind of legal field. So, normally with our policies, we don't usually look for legal advice on those types of things. We do absolutely for our bylaws, because they're just like another level of governance. But generally with policies, we don't. But in this case, because it was, it's a direct impact to our human resources, we wanted to make sure that we had that extra sort of check to make sure that what we had written was going to, be legal in nature and be able to withstand any kind of challenge around it.
So just to wrap up here, Amanda, can you give us just a general comment on the tightrope walk that's involved in putting together a policy like this? And I imagine that this applies to nearly every municipality and also a lot of other organizations in Nova Scotia and in the Strait right now. The idea of respecting individual human rights and legal rights, but at the same time ensuring the safety of all of us as we make our way through the latest stage of the Omicron wave of COVID-19. So can you just give us a general thought on what that process has been like for all of you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a difficult situation to try to find some balance in. At the end of the day, certainly Nova Scotia in the last month or so, Adam, we've seen quite a few deaths as a result of this virus. For us, for me personally, the health and safety of our staff, who must, they must interact with the public in many cases, and also the health and safety of our constituents. That has to be our ultimate priority. That priority trumps most things in my mind. However, that being said, we do want to also make sure that we're giving staff fair opportunities to make sure that they have input to the policy. As well as that, that they would be able to comply with it, that we're not writing something that is completely unachievable. And so that's where the policy landed, was that there wouldn't be a testing strategy as part of our policy, because frankly, getting your hands on rapid tests right now, and, government has changed its angle on that, and you can't just go and pick up 50 rapid tests at once. It's just, that's not possible. So writing that into the policy didn't make sense. What we did create was a mandatory vaccination policy, and that would give people a period of time by which they would need to be compliant, and after which they would go on unpaid leave. So it very much mirrors some of the policies that we've seen from the provincial and federal government. And even with that mirroring, though, our several councillors felt that this was important, that we just should get some legal advice on it as well. And so that's kind of where it's at right now. But it definitely is like, it's a little bit like walking a tightrope. And I think part of the pathway to getting to a solution and to getting to a policy that council can approve means that we've got input from the councillors. It means that we've got input from staff. And I should mention our policy and bylaw committee includes all of council, and it includes our senior staff at the municipality as well. If I can be very frank, I feel where we miss the boat a little bit is that we don't have any members of the public on our policy and bylaw committee. And that is something I'm absolutely hoping will be rectified when we enter our strategic planning process, because our committee structure will be reviewed during that process as well. I would love to see members of the public welcomed back to that table.
It all links together in a way, so it's interesting to see how this all connects. Just quickly, as we're wrapping up, should we expect to see anything concrete in terms of a vaccination policy within the next month? Are we looking at late February for the regular council meeting, or March?
Yeah, I suspect it's going to come back to our February council meeting once we get that piece of that legal review completed. It's a little bit like crystal balling. I'm assuming it's going to come back at the end of February. If there's a large volume of work with our solicitor, it may take a little longer, but hopefully they'll be able to get it back to us in time for our February.
We'll hear more from Warden Amanda Mombourquette coming up later in this edition of Telile 24/7. But right now, let's connect with Michael Hatt, the owner and operator of the Medicine Shoppe on Reeves Street in Port Hawkesbury. Since this past spring, Hatt has been one of a number of people around the Strait area putting vaccines in arms to help ward off or slow down COVID-19. But at the same time, he's done so using some innovative methods that have earned him respect from all the way around Nova Scotia, both from his peers and those who are also concerned with bringing physicians to the Strait area. And we're going to talk to Hatt right now about not only all of this, but also about a significant milestone that Hatt and his Medicine Shoppe colleagues have recently reached in terms of the number of vaccines that they've administered. Let's join with Michael Hatt right now. And joining us now from the Medicine Shoppe in Port Hawkesbury is the proprietor of the Medicine Shoppe and of the mobile vaccination clinic that you've seen there. His shop just passed a significant milestone of 12,000 vaccinations delivered during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. He is Michael Hatt. Michael, thank you for making some time for me today.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning, and you have reached a significant milestone, as we just mentioned. 12,200 vaccinations is actually the number you just told me before we started this interview. So can you tell me what it feels like to pass such a significant milestone, especially at this stage of the pandemic?
A little bit of relief, trepidation, hoping that this will soon be over.
I think we all are. Yeah.
As wonderful as it's been, we reached our max that we can safely say that we're happy doing, and we'd be glad to see it over at any time.
How has this impacted you and your staff? Because I imagine when you're getting ready to set up a business like this, you never expect you're going to be in a massive vaccination campaign during a worldwide pandemic. What kind of impact has this had on you personally, but also the people you're working with to get these shots in arms?
No planning for this at any point during the foundation of creating the pharmacy. And even back in February of last year, when the first announcement was that we would be conducting vaccinations, I sat down, crunched numbers, and figured at most I could do 6,000 to 8,000. I figured that would be the complete maximum that we could do. Here we are hitting the 12,000. Phenomenal. In order to achieve it, it's been a roller coaster ride. Our staff have been working around the clock, in at 7 in the morning and leaving at 8 or 9 at night. Working day and night, as many shots done as possible. And to also highlight the month of January, we acted through about 2,000 doses, which is phenomenal for us. Where even in the summer when we were in a mobile clinic doing what we thought would be the most that we could do, we were only achieving about 1,200 a month there. So we saw the need and through for the month of January.
You mentioned you're giving 2,000 shots a day as opposed to 1,200. How has the arrival of the booster shot era changed the way that you and your staff are handing out vaccines right now?
It's a little easier. Certainly there is a sense of urgency, but not the sense of urgency with one or two that people were receiving May through August. We could sense from the individuals that they were urgent to get it. They wanted it now. A little bit of that is relieved. And also we had a lot of supply and demand issues in the summer months that aren't necessarily affecting us. So it is a little bit of an easier pace. That's probably why we were able to fit in 2,000 in January versus the summer months. And I must say that it did go smoothly. Other than Mother Nature kicking in and raising a fuss on some of our clinic days. But no, it went quite well.
Now, I remember interviewing you last April about this, and you'd mentioned that it was sometimes hard to communicate to people that the schedule for vaccination doses locally was largely dependent on the supply chain coming from the provincial government, which was, of course, determined by vaccine delivery from the federal government. Do you find that as we're now in the booster shot era, that it's more consistent in terms of the doses that are available for you folks to be able to give to people?
Right now, we are experiencing more of a availability with Pfizer than we are Moderna. So people that are seeking Moderna may be stuck getting a Pfizer. But both are, of course, considered interchangeable, and we would gladly speak with the individual to hopefully put their mind at ease at that. But yeah, certainly things are running more smoothly from the provincial supply chain and the federal supply chain, which of course is making things a lot easier on us.
One of the changes, of course, in addition to the booster shots being made available, is that vaccinations have now been available for people under the ages of 17, now heading into the 5 to 11 cohort as well, too. Can you give me a sense on how the uptake has been locally in terms of children coming in to get their vaccines at the medicine shop?
We have a lot of uptake. I'm surprised, actually. What we're seeing now, though, is we are seeing a pretty good uptake. Obviously, school-age children are the last cohort, their vaccinations. And there was parents that I know initially felt uncomfortable. But really, in the province to move ahead and relieve some of our restrictions, we need to try many of our population as possible. So I think that the approval has improved, and we are certainly seeing a good proportion of school-age children.
One of the reasons I wanted to catch up with you, Michael, is because of the unique way that you distributed vaccinations at the medicine shop last year. Much of it took place from the mobile vaccination clinic. You'd purchased a previously used ambulance and wound up being able to convert that into a vaccination clinic, first for flu and then for COVID-19. What's the status of that now? It seems most of your vaccinations, if not all of them right now, are being done right out of the shop. What's the status of the mobile vaccination clinic?
We were using the mobile clinic as an extra office space, essentially, during the summer, especially due to the we just couldn't accommodate everybody in the pharmacy. Now, with some of the easing of restrictions and some of our scheduling, we're able to spread our vaccines over the whole week. So, for example, in the summer, our supply was going to be available for 3 days of a week, which meant that we had to do larger numbers per day, which we couldn't accommodate in the pharmacy. Now we can spread it over the 5 to 6 days and be able to logistically handle that within the store, which makes it for us. So, in all honesty, the mobile clinic has been parked for quite some time. We do get the odd request for someone that may be housebound, and we are trying to accommodate those requests as we can. The provincial government has now set up their own in-house delivery. So we are trying to refer people off that logistic sense for both us and government.
Okay.
But the clinic still does get pulled up from time to time.
You did mention earlier on the relief and optimism that you and your staff are feeling, hoping that we may be rounding the curve and heading for home in terms of COVID-19. That being said, are you optimistic and almost looking forward to a point where the mobile vaccination clinic can come back out to serve its original purpose, which was for influenza vaccines? Do you see a future of being able to use the vehicle there as well?
We're still doing second doses, which obviously means that 6 months down the road, those people are going to require a booster. We also are dealing with certain populations that may be immunocompromised and require fourth dose. So as much as I would love to say that after this month we'll never deliver a COVID shot again, obviously it's still going to be part of our business as usual, but that will bring back into October, November influenza season starting. So of course we will still be hitting the road and offering our mobile clinic for that. So yeah, as much as I would like to say that we can wash our hands of COVID-19, we've still got a little bit of road ahead.
We wanted to take a couple of minutes to acknowledge that you have actually received quite a few accolades in recent weeks. We've noticed the Vital Cape Breton Leadership Awards has named you a Vital Pandemic Leadership Award. This is co-sponsored by the Cape Breton Partnership and Next Gen Cape Breton. You also received the Making Your Health Your Business Award from the Community of Care Awards, sponsored by the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health Committee. So talk a little bit about that if you could. And I mean, also just a year ago, you were named the recipient of a Dr. Robert Strang Award. This is in terms of something from Doctors Nova Scotia helping people through the pandemic. So can you give me a sense on what it feels like to be honored by your peers, but also by the general community for the work you've done?
It's obviously a great honor. You know, we started off doing our vaccine campaign, not of course to be recognized, but to get them delivered and hopefully get out of the pandemic as soon as possible. I have an excellent staff, and together we all came up with plans that we could try and deliver as many as possible. And as such, we did make some headlines, and the implementation of using the mobile clinic just helped us in our process. And I could mention too that we recently received honor from our offices Store of the Year in recognition of those awards that we've received locally. So, you know, we are certainly all honored. We thank those that have nominated us. We hope that we can continue to serve the public as we can.
And just to wrap up, just kind of borrowing on that theme as well, it really has felt like a team effort to be able to get all of this done and to be able to keep slogging through the various waves of COVID-19 and the various stages of the vaccine rollout. So I just wonder, we talked earlier on about how you never could have perceived or imagined something like this happening in terms of your career, but what would you say are things that you'll take away from this whole process as we slowly make our way out of COVID-19? What are the things you'll remember the most from this time in your life?
Most of our staff were working way above usual hours. So to appreciate downtime is certainly one of the takeaway messages that we've all learned. Time management, of course, has been a big issue in organizing. We've gone from a staff of typically 3 working per shift up to 7 or 8, which is highly unusual for a pharmacy of our size. So we've certainly had some hurdles and some learning curves that we've gotten through. We've had great collaboration. So the province early on allowed us to bring nursing staff in to help. and we would be stuck without them. So we've had a great learning experience that way, and hopefully the province will continue to implement or maintain some of the they've implemented during this pandemic that will give pharmacists and pharmacies an opportunity of the public a little bit better.
We've covered a lot of ground in a short time, as I thought we would. Michael, did you add anything else that you wanted to add just before we wrap this up?
This was not something that everybody wanted to do, but the response that we've had from the public has been great. People have been very appreciative and gracious, and have done well, to say the least, in cooperating with us to get this done.
Well, we appreciate all the work that you and your staff have done to get vaccines in arms over the past year. And I appreciate that in the middle of all that, you've been able to give me some time here today. So thank you so much, Michael Hatt, for joining me on Telile 24/7 once again.
Thank you, Adam.
Michael Hatt is the owner-operator of the medicine shop Port Hawkesbury. We've been speaking to him via Zoom from his office at the shop. Stay tuned for more of Telile 24/7 in just a moment. Right now, as promised, we're going to take a deeper dive into an emergency meeting of Richmond Municipal Council that took place virtually last week. It was all about the level of transparency between council and its citizens with regards to committees of council and whether the meetings of committees of council were even being openly advertised. In just a couple of minutes, I'll speak to Richmond Warden Amanda Mombourquette about all of this and where we go from here. But first, I thought you might like to see some of the activity and discussion that took place during that emergency meeting.
There's been some bylaw policy items posted to the website previously, some have not, and as well as these other committees. And I'm just, I'm just wondering if and how we could do some retroactive work, because I think, that was certainly what our intention was, and to have all of these meetings, at least the agendas, be public. So I guess I have a question as well. Are the minutes required to be public? We put our minutes from our committee of the whole and regular council meetings. So I would assume that all of these as well would be for sure on a go forward basis be posted. And I'm just wondering if, and again, I would look to Dawn in terms of what's possible from a staff perspective to go back and post some of these minutes.
If we were to make a decision on minutes, we would have to include that in the policy, because I know that the committee of the whole and council meetings are all legislated with respect to timelines and deadlines posting minutes.
Okay.
But there are no requirements in the MGA to post minutes of committees of council. So we would probably likely have to include that in the policy as well. Yeah, but I don't think we have a procedural policy right now. So for posting minutes, we follow the legislation based on what the province tells us we're required to do.
I would definitely agree with you, Dawn. If it's not clear in the MGA that minutes are to be are to be posted, we would want that to be part of our policy as well for those committees. So agendas before and minutes after.
I agree. I think one of our, I'm sure I can speak for all of us, but one of our major things was transparency. And the last thing I want is anybody to think we're not. So again, if that means we have to go back on what we did in the past and correct it, well, then so be it. But again, if it's not written out, then it's our job to make sure gets written out.
Are we going to put a timeline, like how far back are we going to go to do that?
Yeah. So did you want to do to October 2020?
Mm-hmm. Well, November 2020, because that's
whichever. Yeah, November 2020. I think.
Yeah. And I don't think either, I mean, this is obviously more of an operational comment, Dawn, but it's not that they need to be in date orders or whatever. I think on the website, we have the ability to create a folder, and the folder could just be, audit minutes, and they could all just be dumped in the folder. So I recognize that there is a lot of minutes through all of these, right? So the intention here is not to make a ton of work. We want to make it relatively easy for the public to find the items. But no need to, kind of try to fit them in. We've got a bit of a long list, so folders might actually work better anyway. So that's just, again, trying to make it not overly complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, actually. I think putting a folder at this stage is probably appropriate. We don't want to hide them into dates as well. We don't want to go back and start shoving them in behind, make it look like we're just dropping them in something we haven't done. So honestly, I think since the meeting being held tonight, we made a motion to include it. Then we may want to have just a folder of, one special folder broken down with
For each of the
the
committees.
with each of the committees, for past meetings. That way there, anybody who wanted to catch up or thought they missed something, it's very easy for them to go back and find it.
People are going to be involved in the through the public visitation of these meetings, and they're going to see the draft policy. But we're not going to provide that to the public. It's no different than when we do our audit committee and we have draft financial statements. We don't provide that to the public either. And there's a real good reason why, because they're not complete.
I think that providing draft policies, we all know through bylaw policy meetings that we go through many different iterations of a document, and they can be different. They can be quite different. And I think, sharing with the public what we're talking about or what we're considering is totally fair and right. And that's part of that public participation in the meeting, right? Being at the meeting and listening and whatever. And I would agree that, publishing draft policies or bylaws until they are moving forward to a council meeting would not be appropriate in my opinion, because I think sometimes what happens is people see the document and we may have the word draft on it, but people don't see the word draft necessarily, and just take it to mean this is exactly how it's going to go. And we know very well that we've had draft policies that have gone in completely different directions. And so my feeling would be we would need to be at the end of that road. And I don't mean passed by council, but I mean passed by council out of bylaw policy and on its way to the committee of the whole before it's something that would be shared, would be my opinion. But
yeah, and I'm in agreement with Deputy Warden and the CEO for sure. And I mean, if these committee meetings and all these draft policies are going to be discussed publicly, and the public's going to be part of these meetings, then of course they're going to be aware of where the policy is going and what direction the policy is going in, and they can almost assume what the final policy is going to look like. So coming out with a draft one during that process, when the public is aware and part of that process, to me is not a good idea for sure. Yeah. And again, they're going to be part of the process. They're probably going to be able to assume what a policy is going to look like, and so no need to see a draft.
The only issue I would have, and it's not an issue, I guess, would be to make sure that one, we are following the MGA requirements, and two, that we're not blindsiding people by not. I understand, Deputy Warden's concern or Sampson's concern of not publishing it because people might get the wrong idea. I just hope by not publishing it, we're not giving people the wrong idea that we are trying to be. So I guess my question would be, would we publish the audio part where somebody can go back into or would we just, how is that any different than not doing it now?
So we haven't typically published audio. I think that would get really difficult in terms of file sizes, and when you think about the length of our discussions there. But I guess part of my question on this one is I kind of agree with very draft policies that are not left policy and bylaw, but once they do get referred to council meetings, I feel like they become part of the public record even more so, and that's a different threshold. So Councillor Digdon, I do think, like, a lot of times at policy and bylaw we get a draft back and it's like so incomplete, it's not even coherent, really, you know what I mean, because we are formulating our thoughts in the discussion. But once it gets referred out from policy and bylaw to council for discussion, then it's coherent, right? Then it's starting to look like what a final is probably going to look like, and actually market draft and make it, part of the public record, right?
But at that stage, aren't we already at the point, excuse me, where we were going to bring it to committee of the whole anyway, which is already televised and open to the public. So I guess my only issue there is leading up to that stage, we're leaving the public out, and then if they want to go back to find anything, well, so I guess if they missed the meeting and they want to go back, then there's no way for them to go back and interpret anything that was done or said if we don't publish it.
The most of our discussion would be in the minutes, but I do think Councillor Digdon, our vaccination policy is a really good example of this, right? So as we were drafting it, there were things in there that, you know, just didn't make sense in the context of Richmond County, but we were, you know, staff was pulling best practices from a lot of different places and we were having conversations about it. But then we did refer it out of policy and bylaw to council. Now, at that point, it, you know, it's a draft policy that's coming to council for approval. We chose not to approve it because we wanted to send it back to policy and bylaw. And I think the advice was to get some legal advice on it.
There's no other documents that we publish in advance of a meeting that we end up approving at a meeting. It's just not been our practice. So I can appreciate what you're saying. I just would say I would disagree that once the discussion is had at bylaw policy, and now that, or whatever meeting, right? So we're very focused on bylaw policy, but I mean, it's the same as our draft budget is a great example, right? That would come out of audit. So audit committee would say, we're going to discuss certain things that members of the public could attend so they can hear the conversation that we're having in terms of building our budget. And then when audit committee is completed, they make a motion to refer to committee of the whole. We take, you know, we'd all know the process, but it doesn't get shared publicly in an official way until it is approved by us at council, right? So we're not doing it for anything else, but now we're talking about maybe doing that for our bylaws or policies or whatever, you know, policies in particular. And again, I would just say until it is approved by council, the physical document, in my opinion, is not a publishable document because it's not approved by us.
Okay.
The discussion is had, right? So if you wanted to, you know, you look at the agenda, oh, today they're going to talk about, you know, whatever, you know, pick a policy, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
They're going to talk about it. So I'm going to attend the meeting because I want to hear what they're talking about. And when we have the conversation, we basically go through the policy and we talk about what's in there and what we like and what we don't like and how we want to change it. I mean, you don't necessarily need to see the document to know what the document says. It is well discussed and documented in minutes. So again, I would, you know, feel free to get legal advice, I guess, if others would think that that's appropriate. Personally, I just think I don't need legal advice to know that we don't do it with other items for good reason, because that's the process, you know, with our budget or with whatever. And I'm not, I don't see the value in presenting those prior to approval, because there's lots of conversation that is public prior to approval.
So now you have a better idea of the discussion that was happening at last week's emergency meeting of Richmond Municipal Council. To get a better sense of where we go from here in terms of the openness of Richmond County's council committees, here is Richmond Warden Amanda Mombourquette. So we wanted to bring you in today, Warden Mombourquette, to speak with us about the emergency meeting that was held by council last night. And it seemed that this meeting had to do with the advertisement of committee meetings for the municipality and making sure that it's well known that these meetings are open to the public. Can you give me a sense of what led to this meeting and what resulted in terms of the emergency meeting held at council last night?
Yeah, for sure. So you're right on the money, Adam. You know, it was brought to my attention last week by a couple of members of the media, actually, that our recent bylaw and policy meetings just prior to Christmas hadn't been advertised to the public. So I went back and looked at our website, looking on our social media. I brought, couldn't see anything there. I brought the matter to the attention of our staff and our council. It was disappointing to find that our public committee meetings really have not been adequately and consistently advertised. So that was absolutely the topic of our discussion last night, and something that I felt we needed to clear up extremely quickly, because of course the Municipal Government Act, which sets the rules by which municipalities operate, it's not a guideline, it's a rule, and we weren't in full compliance, and so that really concerned me greatly.
Were you surprised when you found out that these meetings weren't being advertised, and what was your immediate thought when you discovered it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my immediate thought was I was just extremely disappointed. Like, how could we have missed this? But, certainly there are times when our committee meetings had been advertised, but then there were other times when they weren't. So my immediate reaction following that disappointment was, okay, we need to make sure that this is consistently happening. And so I checked in with some of the counselors and I felt it was most appropriate for us to hold an emergency meeting because it was a problem that needed to be fixed very quickly, and it's a serious problem.
So what happens now, basically? We knew there were a couple of motions that were passed at last night's meeting concerning this issue. What is the municipality going to be doing differently from here on in?
So we passed a couple of motions actually, because, as much as we needed to talk about the problem itself, we also, of course, wanted to come up with a solution. And it's one of the reasons, anytime you hold an emergency meeting, I want to start out by saying, it's a judgment call, right? And after checking in with several folks, it felt to me that this definitely warranted an emergency meeting because we wanted to fix the problem right away. And so in terms of the actions, the solutions that we wanted to talk about at that meeting, we did a few things. First of all, we identified, we approve a committee structure after each election, right? The committee structure then has appointees that are appointed to sit on these committees. Some of those committees are under the direct control of council, and they would be considered committees appointed by council. And that's what the Municipal Government Act refers to when it sets out these rules. So those committees that we identified last night include Committee of the Whole. They include our Audit Committee, Planning, Advisory and Heritage Committee, our Bylaw and Policy Committee, of course, the Police Advisory Committee, our Municipal Emergency Management Committee, our Accessibility Advisory Committee, and our Fire Services Committee. And so we identified those committees specifically because number one, they were committees that were appointed by council, and number two, they are essentially under the control of council in the sense that any decisions made there come back to council as a recommendation, and council makes a decision to take action on them. Okay. So with those committees identified from last night's meeting, we then passed a motion to instruct staff to treat those committees accordingly as committees appointed by council and make them public in accordance with the requirements set out in the Municipal Government Act, including advertising them on our website and social media. So that motion passed, and for me, that was a big relief because that meant that that decision is in effect immediately. So it doesn't need to go back to the Committee of the Whole and then be approved at a regular council meeting. That is a decision that's happening that will be implemented immediately. But further to that, just to make sure that we stay on track and that these committees of council are recognized widely, not just by the council and the staff, but also by the public as committees of council. We wanted to enshrine that motion in kind of a formal policy that would be taken to bylaw and policy, discussed there, drafted, and then passed as a formal policy by which council will abide and by which staff will abide going forward.
Okay. And I think it's helpful to make the distinction as well, too. I believe it was Councillor Michael Dignan that brought this up at last night's emergency meeting, that these committees that you spoke of are separate from, for example, the board of the Richmond Villa, which will have a number of councillors or the warden sitting on it at the same time. But that's not what these new policies cover. These policies specifically cover committees of council.
That's right. And from my perspective, Adam, that's, there's a little bit of common sense that needs to be applied to this whole situation, right? And if there's a councillor sitting on a committee that can make its own decision and is independent of council, then that's not a committee appointed by council. That's a councillor appointed to sit on a committee. It's not, it doesn't constitute a committee of council because it's not under the control of council. And so, certainly from my perspective, I understood that was the case, and I assumed that everybody did, but clearly that wasn't the case. And so, so that's why we wanted to be really specific in identifying which of those committees are actually committees appointed by council. So for instance, the board of the Richmond Villa even the work that, we do with Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health, the Housing Coalition, like there are members of us appointed to all of these various committees, but they're independent bodies and they don't need to go back to council with a recommendation in order to take an action. And so they wouldn't necessarily apply those same Municipal Government Act rules. They may have other rules to make sure that there's public participation, and many of them do actually, right? But it's not the same sort of narrow set of guidelines that the Municipal Government Act sets out.
We've covered a lot of ground, Warden, as I thought we might in these last couple of minutes. Anything else you'd like to add about any of this just before we wrap up?
Yeah, actually, Adam, I just wanted to mention that another of the actions that we took last night was to instruct staff to go back as far, I think, as November 2020. We were elected at the end of October, sworn in at the end of October 2020. So by November 2020, we were starting to conduct council business at the committee level. We asked our staff to go back and publish the agendas and the minutes from all of those meetings to make sure that they're available on our website, because we didn't want to have any gaps in terms of public access to information. The other thing I want to say, I guess, is that I'm just really proud of how our council reacted to this situation. They realized that swift and decisive action needed to be taken. We discussed it as a group. We all had differing opinions, but at the end of the day, I think we've come to a solution that I'm really proud of, and I'm really proud of them for recognizing the issue and for working together with each other and with staff to come to a solution, because it's not easy to. You've made a mistake, but once you find a mistake, it's kind of like, once we discovered this, we were all thinking, okay, what's our path forward to a solution? And so I'm just really pleased with how the response went.
Well, we appreciate you taking some time to sort through all of this with us. And Amanda Mombourquette, it's a pleasure to have you back on Telile 24/7. Thanks so much for giving us some time here, Warden.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Adam.
All right, thank you. Amanda Mombourquette is the Warden of Richmond County, and we've been speaking to her via Zoom from her home office. And there you have it, folks. That wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'd like to thank you for tuning in, and a big thank you to my interview guests this week, Amanda Mombourquette and Michael Hatt. And once again, thank you to my assistant cameraman in Auld's Cove, Patrick Lamey, for his help on the anti-vaccine mandate protest story. If you have anything to say about what you've seen in the past hour, or if you'd just like to make suggestions for future editions of Telile 24/7, I'd love to hear them. You can contact me directly. My phone number is 902-625-8863, and you can reach me by email using the address adamjrcook, cook with an E, @gmail.com. Don't forget, you can also contact Telile Community Television directly with your thoughts and suggestions. You can reach the station in Arishat by calling area code 902-226-1928, or use the email address info@telile.tv. Follow Telile Community Television on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And our YouTube channel features every single edition of Telile 24/7, including this one, as well as our sister programs Roundtable and Notre Côté. We also feature local analysis of Nova Scotia's official COVID-19 briefings. That's a YouTube-only service we provide, in addition to the simulcasting of the briefings on Telile TV, so make sure you check that out on our YouTube channel as well. I'm Adam Cook. Thank you once again for tuning in to Telile 24/7. I look forward to seeing you again next week with a brand new show. Bye for now.